It's early in the morning. The room and environment around feel kind of ethereal. Time and life move softly and smoothly, almost never in a hurry. Jessica sleeps comfortably in her bedroom, but a subtle boom coming from what seems to be a place close by wakes her up. She was sleeping profoundly in a darkened bedroom as the morning sun began to rise. It takes Jessica a few seconds to realize she was asleep, and that she should check out the window to find out where the noise come from. She walks around the house looking for the source of the weird noise, but finds nothing strange, and realizes that it is, actually, still dark outside. Her sleep was ruined, so she begins her day as usual. Outside, there's a large old yard full of cars. It's too early in the morning, and the city is still asleep, but the car alarms go off at the same time for no reason. Jessica shakes off the weird sonic sound and moves on with her life. The main reason why Jessica is in Colombia is because of her sister Karen, who's in a hospital. She waits by her sister's hospital bed as she sleeps. Karen looks weak. She wakes up dizzy and confused, and falls back to sleep seconds later. Jessica takes the time to scroll down on some pictures on her phone, but her sister finally wakes up. They chat for a brief moment before Karen falls asleep again. She is going through some health issues that require medical attention at all times, at least for a while. A while later, at a university campus cafeteria, Jessica gets together with Juan Ospina, a friend who happens to be a poet and her sister's husband. Juan and Jessica seem to have a great relationship. He is a published author who has had his work translated into English by Jessica. She mentions the noise that woke her up the other day, asking if the neighbor was doing a renovation again. Juan doesn't know of any renovation or construction in the area and believes it was just an odd feeling, due to the strangeness of moving to Colombia and into a new home. They talk poetry, and Juan recites some ideas that he wants Jessica to translate into English. Back to her noisy neighborhood issue, Juan mentions she should talk to a young man named Herman from the music department. He might be able to help her identify what the sound actually is. On her way back home, weird things keep happening. Jessica has a strong connection to her environment and always takes long walks around the city. It's a regular day in Bogotá. Jessica crosses a street, passing by a bus that startles everyone with a blunt roar from its exhaust, freaking a guy out. He looked really terrified. Moving on, Jessica starts a new day. Colombia is a tropical country, so strong and sudden storms are not uncommon. In the back of her mind, the mysterious boom echoes, and she can't let go of the strange feeling that grew inside of her. Jessica arrives at the music wing of the university. A lecture on musical instruments is happening in the auditorium, and lots of students attend it. The man she's looking for, Hernan, is busy and hyper-focused in the music studio while editing something. Jessica approaches him and introduces herself as Juan's friend. She had no idea if she'd be interrupting something, so she insists on waiting for him to finish his work. It seems like Juan briefed Hernan on Jessica's complaint of a strange and frequent bang noise, which she has been hearing in random places and at random times. Since he's a music producer, he might be able to help her identify what it is, or the nature of the noise. They stand before a huge sound mixer with big screens and endless keyboards. This is where things begin to get interesting, as the pursuit of the perfect description of the noise begins. Jessica explains that it sounds like a metallic ball hitting the solid ground, but that maybe there's also a nuance of water splashing. Hernan presents to her his musical library and plays some beats, to see if Jessica recognizes something that may sound familiar. Jessica doesn't seem to be a music buff, but describes sounds with peculiar precision. She gives some very precise cues of how the noise sounded, although she feels like she is failing at her description. Hernan's great ears capture what Jessica tries to say, and within a few minutes, he finds something that resembles the weird noise Jessica heard earlier that day. For some reason, the discovery makes her lose focus for a while, but she doesn't know why. Back at the hospital, Jessica observes life happening from the hospital window. She observes the flow of people downstairs without a specific focus, just her eyes following people's movement. For a moment, everything and everyone seem to be so far away from her, as if she observes life through a magnifier lens. At a certain moment, she sits by herself in one of the wings of the campus and has some coffee. Things always happen incredibly slowly, quietly, and calmly, but the silence is broken by a woman in a white coat. It looks like she works there. It's Agnes, an archaeologist who's conducting research on some findings that just came from a tunnel that's being built. The construction workers and the Colombian army got surprised by several human bones buried in the tunnel area, and they had no idea of who those remains belonged to, or when they were buried there. That's where Agnes comes in, to help with this delicate investigation. After a while, Jessica doesn't have much to do, so she goes exploring the city. She stays in a library for a short while, then visits a museum, and ends her day walking back home, taking in the Colombian fresh air. It looks like a pretty boring life, so much so that the highlight of her evening is when a stray dog follows her around town. But she feels like that's her pace, and it feels nice. The quiet evening becomes a bit more intense for Jessica when she hears the boom again. She feels so intrigued and vulnerable at this moment, because she is walking around the city and no one else seems to have heard it. She can't stop thinking about it, so the next morning, she decides to do something different, to keep her mind busy. She pays a visit to the woman in the white coat, Agnes. She's still studying the human remains found in the tunnel. The more Agnes studies the bones, the more puzzled she gets. The mystery sounds fascinating to Jessica. Later that day, Jessica contemplates life, sitting by a statue on the university campus. Hernan finds her there. He wants to show her a piece of music he's created. She's not really interested, but he's a nice guy. She'd probably define him as a gentleman, so she feels compelled to be nice back. She tries to break off the conversation and move on with her errands, but he keeps small talking, and she goes with the flow. Their interaction flows so naturally that he ends up accompanying her as she runs her errands. Despite the fact of being away from her farm where she grows orchids, Jessica plans to continue her work from Colombia and goes shopping for a specific refrigerator to transport the delicate flowers to the farm. Her search for the equipment leads her to a city nearby to check on some refrigerator models, and Hernan offers to take her there. The afternoon goes far better than Jessica thought. Later that night, Jessica meets Juan and her sister for dinner. Karen looks much healthier now, and they talk about her work. Karen and Juan's little boy is with them, eating quietly. Jessica is really invested in the conversation, but is struck by the shivering feeling of hearing that mysterious noise again, and no one else seems to have heard it. She loses focus completely as the noise of what now sounds like a hard knock on an old wooden door hits 3 times. She tries to keep the conversation natural, but something is definitely wrong with her. The strangest thing happens to her the next morning. She goes to campus looking for Hernan, since he offered to take her on the short trip to a town nearby. She's in the music wing, walking around asking for Hernan, but one seems to know him, which she finds odd, since Juan was the one to recommend him to help her. Well, he's not there, but she has to go anyways, so off she goes. The road trip is peaceful, but the tranquility meets a strange blockage on the highway, due to some kind of construction or repair. The blockage was due to an excavation in a tunnel. It takes a while, but she gets there and meets Agnes at the town square. They talk about trivial things for a while, and that's it. The next morning, still under the pressure and anxiety of not knowing what the sound means, Jessica goes to a medical appointment to talk about her complaints. The doctor asks a couple of questions about the sound she hears and her sleeping routine. Jessica claims to sleep terribly. Even though the doctor claims to understand her trouble to sleep, she doesn't prescribe Jessica any medication. Jessica is surprised by not getting what she wanted from that consultation. She can't sleep and keeps hearing strange and loud noises. She asks the doctor for something to help her sleep better, but the doctor believes she's likely to develop some kind of addiction and denies her request for medicine, which she finds utterly weird. The doctor strongly believes that she can get better by changing her pillows and by reading the Word of God, because according to her, only when Jessica surrenders completely to the Lord will she find peace and understanding. Jessica doesn't know what to say, and she doesn't want to be rude, but is visibly disappointed. She leaves the doctor's practice and goes for a walk by a stream hidden between green vegetation. The town around her seems to fade away as she walks by the water, further into the endless tree tracks. But her moment of peace and quiet stops when she hears the noise repeating again a few times. She looks for the boom noise but, as usual, finds nothing. As a matter of fact, she finds a middle-aged man who sits by the river, cleaning up some fish. For a moment, she doesn't know whether she should approach him, but he greets her and seems to be friendly, so they start talking. The man seems to know Jessica and where she's staying while in town. He gives her some input of what he knows, maybe in an attempt to reassure her that he might be a nice guy. He offers her a stool chair, and the conversation flows naturally as he talks about his lifestyle, which sounds pretty different from hers. The middle-aged man lives off the land, the nature, while she's clearly an urban animal, kind of lost and looking for some kind of deeper connection or understanding. He explains how magnificent the power of nature is, and how vibrations and energies are printed all over it. Jessica can't really understand how a person can exist being away from ordinary things, like going to a soccer match or watching TV. But he tells her that the place offers him everything he ever needed, and everything he ever wanted. Their conversation goes on, and now Jessica feels comfortable enough to ask him for a drink sitting by his table. She drinks it fast, and feels the liquid going down, burning her throat. That makes her realize she hasn't introduced herself yet. She says her name is Jessica, and the man replies, saying he's Hernan. She stops for a second, because it sounds odd to her. What a coincidence that man's name is Hernan, like the music producer back from Bogota. The conversation is quite nice. Hernan describes the way of life of the animals of the area, and how connected to all of it he is. When it's her time to share, she opens her heart to the strangeness of the noise she's been hearing for the last few days. Hernan listens to her quietly. She confesses that the noise has become more constant and more intense, but that, for some reason, she wants to hear more of it. She is more intrigued than ever, but what Hernan tells her next doesn't seem to surprise her at all. Jessica asks Hernan if he remembers his dreams after waking up, but he tells her that his species don't dream. That sounds interesting, but not alarming to her, and she makes a request. She wants to know what it's like to sleep and just disappear in his own mind like that. Jessica asks him, point blank, to show her what it looks like to fall unconscious as he sleeps. Hernan falls asleep, right there on the grass next to her, beside an ancient tree and the sound of birds. It feels peaceful. The oddest thing is that, as Hernan sleeps, he stops breathing. His eyes are half open, and look far too distant from reality. She sits by his side, observing and imagining what it's like to just switch off like that completely. Hernan stays there for quite a while, but eventually wakes up. She doesn't seem surprised by what he has just pulled off, and asks him what it feels like not to be alive. Hernan doesn't feel like he can put it into words, but he tries, and tells her that it feels like he just stopped being. Jessica is washed away by a huge wave of melancholy and fascination. But for Hernan, it's just another day. No big deal. They go back inside Hernan's house. It's a small and old home, but it feels familiar to Jessica. She recognizes the view from the window and some of the furniture. They keep drinking and sitting by the table, and Jessica feels overwhelmed with so many strong feelings at the same time. She tells Hernan she remembers hiding under the old bed that sits in the corner with the blue blanket. As she hid there, she knew that there were people coming for her family. The fragments of images are clear, but incomplete, and she finds in Hernan some sort of outlet to explain these fragments. She keeps describing to him the vivid fragments of images she sees. For example, when her mother found her under the bed, fists clenched, terrified. Her mother managed to put her back to bed, holding her hand so she could fall asleep. But even though she felt a little safer, there was also a sense that something was wrong with her nose. It was kind of peeling and burning for some reason she couldn't remember. Hernan completes the fragments with more imagery and says he woke up that night at 4 and needed to pee, but couldn't leave, so he went down the bed. Jessica feels devastated for realizing those fragments of memories never belonged to her. She falls apart, crying. He explains that those fragments are memories, and that he holds them with him, even though he doesn't have the ability to see them. Another shocking moment hits Jessica when he tells her she's like an antenna, and he is something like a hard drive. He saves up his memories like files in a computer, but since he doesn't have what it takes to visualize them, he transmits his memories to an antenna, meaning Jessica. Hernan asks her why she's crying, since those memories are not hers. She talks about the noise again and takes his hand, as if that way he could also hear it or feel it somehow. Jessica feels more connected to him than ever before. Every second that goes by, she solves a piece of the dreamlike puzzle, putting together little fragments that help complete the image. Hernan shares with her that the noise is real, it happened, but long before their time. Suddenly, Jessica hears heavy rain approaching, but she looks outside and the sun shines with no clouds around it. It's a fragment of memory. Jessica and Hernan now hear voices coming from outside of the house. It sounds like a heated argument in a language she doesn't understand. She recalls those words from another time. It was something about eating someone's food because it looks delicious, but she can't remember where she heard it. The fight seems to stop at the sound that has been haunting Jessica. The rainy noise comes back, but she realizes that now it's not rain, these are waves. She can hear children giggling in the distance, and the sound of waves intensifying. The waves break furiously, and she can't make sense of what those people are talking about. The only word she could understand was Hernan's name. The conversation and the strong waves continue for some time, until everything stops abruptly to the sound of a crash, the noise that has been haunting her all these days. Jessica is in a complete state of shock, and lets go of Hernan's hand, so she can't hear or see his memories anymore. She goes to the window, and after opening it, she hears the noises again, and they come closer. The pause between each bump becomes shorter and shorter, and that brings a smile to Jessica's face. Now she knows it's coming from the woods near Hernan's house. As the shots become clearer, she sees smoke or clouds of dust coming from the top of the trees. Soon after that, something begins to emerge slowly, and the sound gets louder and stronger than ever. It's a vessel, some kind of ship, coming out of a hiding place among the vegetation. The ship moves away, slowly emitting the bang noise over and over again. In the blink of an eye, the ship sprints away, leaving a cloudy circle behind. Some people from Hernan's village seem to have heard or seen something as the ship stormed off. The construction workers back at the tunnel also seem to have heard or seen something odd. That's the moment when Jessica is never seen again. As the noise faded away, it feels like she did too. Hernan sits by his desk and listens to the news on the radio, warning about a volcano that's about to erupt, and archaeological discoveries in a certain tunnel near town. They have found human bones, remains from another time which they can't pinpoint yet, nor can they identify who they belong to. The broadcaster reveals that one of the skulls had strange markings, of what could be from stabbing or something of this sort. Hernan now sits on his porch, glancing at the mountains on the horizon, and feels incredibly distressed by a sudden wave of pain coming from his head. The mountains are covered by a thick layer of clouds. Birds fly away, as if announcing a storm is coming. As the clouds become thicker and more unified, like a giant crop of cotton, Hernan just sits there and contemplates. The birds keep flying around, but what seems to be a gloomy and premonitory landscape becomes stranger and more puzzling as the birds fly away, but the wave of clouds stops completely.